God gave the Sabbath to Adam and Eve at creation, and God gave the Sabbath to Moses in the Ten Commandment law. He gave the Sabbath as a sign all through the Old Testament of his power to recreate hearts. He gave the Sabbath as a sign of his love to us and a symbol of his divine authority. But someone might ask, what about the New Testament? What about Jesus Christ? Did Jesus do away with the Sabbath? Did the disciples change the Sabbath? On what day did they worship? Did they worship on another day? Friend, let's look at the New Testament. What did Jesus teach about the Bible Sabbath? Let's go to Luke 4, verse 16. So he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up to read. So Jesus Christ worshipped every Sabbath. If Jesus wanted to leave another sign or symbol of worship, wouldn't you expect him to leave us a positive example in his life? Isn't it true that a person's will and testament is sealed by their death? You cannot change a person's will after they die, and Christ's will and testament was sealed at his death. And the legacy of his life was, as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up to read. Indeed, Christ kept the Bible Sabbath. He said himself in Mark 2, verse 27, the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. It does not say the Sabbath was made for the Jew only. The Sabbath was made for man. The Sabbath was made for the Jew, yes, also. But the Jew was also part of mankind. It was made for all humanity. The Sabbath was made for Jews and Gentiles alike as a sign of God's creation. It is a sign that we worship him exclusively. It is also a sign that we love him supremely. We were not made for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made as God's gift to us. Adam and Eve were first made, and the Sabbath is God's love gift to the human race. Every Sabbath we flee from stresses of life to his place of worship. The tensions of life evaporate in his presence. The Sabbath is an eternal sign that he created us. Even in death, Jesus Christ kept the Sabbath. Jesus' closest followers rested according to the commandment. They wouldn't even embalm his body on Sabbath. Jesus rested on Sabbath before he was resurrected on the first day of the week. And Jesus kept the Sabbath in life, and Jesus kept the Sabbath in death. Jesus said in John 14, verse 15, if you love me, keep my commandments. Love leads us to obedience. Love leads us to keep his commandments. And Jesus told his disciples that even after his death, even after the crucifixion, even after the resurrection, they would be keeping the Sabbath. One day Jesus gathered his disciples together and discussed the coming destruction of Jerusalem. In Matthew 24, verse 20, we read, and pray that your flight may not be in winter or on the Sabbath. Now, what sense would it make for Jesus to say to his disciples, pray that your flight will not be on the Sabbath, if they were not going to keep the Sabbath in future? It wouldn't have made any sense at all. Why did he say that? If they were all worshipping on the Sabbath together in one place and the Roman armies attacked the city, what would have happened? Well, the Roman armies would have destroyed them. And Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70, years after Jesus had already ascended to heaven. And some people may also ask, has time ever been lost? How can we know which is the real seventh day, which is the real Sabbath? There are at least three ways that you can know. You can know from the Bible, you can know from language, and you can know from astronomy. You will recall that the Sabbath was stated at creation, and it was restated in the Ten Commandments given to Moses. It is clear that there was no time lost between Adam and Moses. Adam kept the seventh day, and so did Moses. All through the Old Testament, from Moses to Jesus, God's people kept the Sabbath. so there was no time lost there. The crucifixion story clearly reveals that the weekly cycle as we know it has not changed from Jesus' time till today. Let's look at the sequence of the days from the Bible. We begin with the day Jesus died. The Bible describes it this way in Luke 23 verses 54 through to chapter 24 verse 1. That day was the preparation, and the Sabbath drew near. And the women who had come with him from Galilee followed after, and they observed the tomb and how his body was laid. Then they returned and prepared spices and fragrant oils, and they rested on the Sabbath according to the commandment. Now, were the closest followers of Jesus following the Sabbath after he died? What does it say? They rested on the Sabbath day according to the commandment. They did not believe that his death changed the commandment in any way whatsoever. And here we have 3 days listed in succession. The day of Christ's death, the next day the Sabbath according to the commandment, the 7th day. Then the Bible says, now on the first day of the week, very early in the morning, they and certain other women with them, what did they do? They came to anoint his body. They came to the tomb bringing the spices which they had prepared. Now let's look at the order of those events. It is very, very clear. You have 3 days, the preparation day, the day Christ died. And what day was that? That was a Friday, the preparation day. The next day, the Sabbath, the day he rested according to the commandment. What day was that? That was the Saturday, the Sabbath day. And the next day, the first day of the week, when the women wished to anoint his body. What day was Jesus resurrected? Sunday, the first day of the week. So the identity of the Sabbath is very, very clear.